Hi, everyone. It's pretty easy for all of us in this room to say that student journalism is important. It's what we dedicate countless hours of our lives to throughout the course of our undergraduate careers. So I think it's really awesome when a professional journalist recognizes the power and importance of student journalism in such an intentional way. And that's what Taylor Blatchford has done throughout her incredible career. Blatchford is a news producer at the Seattle Times, where she focuses on the digital presence of the paper for both its website and social media. She writes a weekly newsletter called The Lead, intended for student journalists like us that seeks to provide resources for both college and high school journalists across the country. Blatchford has also reported on the future of news with a focus on student media at Poynter and worked on audience engagement at a number of publications throughout her career. As a result, I am deeply honored to welcome her to open the Georgia's conference this morning.
Hi, everyone. Oh, is that good? Okay. Good morning, and thanks so much for being here. And thank you so much to the Nieman Foundation for hosting me to speak. Can you guys hear okay? Yes? Okay. Sorry, I'm getting over a cold, so I apologize for my scratchy voice, but I have my tea, so we're ready to go. But yeah, it's a great honor to be here and to be speaking to such a passionate group of student journalists. It was great getting to meet a few people last night, and I'm looking forward to learning from you guys and from the other speakers the rest of today. And thank you so much to Angela for that introduction too. Oops, is this on? Maybe? Sorry, clicker. Oh, there we go. Okay. Hi. Yeah, I'm not going to reintroduce myself. That's me. I'm Taylor. But anyway, one thing that I was thinking about when Angela was talking and when I read the great bio that Nieman wrote for ahead of this conference, it sounds very tidy and nicely like progressed from step to step, but really that is my career from student journalism to now has felt a lot more like a twisted road and a twisted path than it sounds. So I'll walk you through a little bit kind of how I ended up here. So I started out as a student journalist in Colorado. I'm from the Denver area, Denver suburbs. Was involved in my high school newspaper, the usual kind of way that I think a lot of us probably got started in journalism. I had a really great teacher and mentor there. And then from there, I went to the University of Missouri, where I studied journalism, just graduated last year. And even when I was at school, my interests and what I wanted to focus on within journalism really changed a few times within that. So if you are earlier in your college career and you're not sure yet what exactly it is you want to do as a career, I want to encourage you that it can change and it will turn out just fine either way. So when I was there, I started out as a reporter and then a news editor for the University of Missouri's student newspaper, which is called the Man-Eater, a weird name that I explained to some of the people at our table last night. But I promise it's a real paper. Even though on my resume I have to put the Man-Eater like in parentheses student newspaper so people don't look at it and be like, what is that? But when I was there, I covered a lot of university-based news, really focusing on higher education and our school's administration. And there was really no shortage of things to cover when I was there. The University of Missouri went through a lot of race-related protests, and then a student went on a hunger strike asking for our university system's president to step down, which then happened 8 days later. And our football team said they weren't going to play until the president stepped down. So that was really a crazy time to be a student journalist and really solidified my interest for hard news reporting. I'd come into school thinking maybe I wanted to do more features or arts and culture. But at that point, I was working as one of the news editors for the campus paper. And even though it meant a week or two of like 60 hours in the newsroom while, also being a student and trying to go to classes. That didn't happen a lot that week, but that's not advice that I would give, but sometimes it has to happen. That really helped me realize that I really thrived on reporting on breaking news, working under pressure. And it was really humbling, but a great experience to cover a story that also had national journalists coming to our campus. You know, by the time when the football team said they were going to boycott, that was really when it sparked a lot of people's national attention. And we had CNN, the Washington Post, the LA Times, everyone came to our campus, and we were trying to keep up with them as student journalists. But at the same time, we had a lot of benefits coming into that because we had those campus sources and we had been covering everything for the whole semester leading up to that. So that was a really pivotal experience in my student journalism life. So then from there, I also went on to work for our local community newspaper in Missouri. The Mizzou J School is a little weird in how like the student publications are structured. There's the Maneater is typically staffed by mostly freshmen and sophomores because then when you're an upperclassman, you work with the community paper, which is edited by professors but staffed by students. So it's kind of a weird hybrid, but it's a really good way to then get to learn from professors who have a lot of professional experience but still be working alongside students. So I did some more reporting there on the university. But my career up until like midway through my junior year was really focused on reporting and then editing. And then I had an internship through a study abroad program. I was in Brussels, Belgium for a semester and was able to intern at Politico Europe when I was there. And they stuck me on a job that is ironically very similar to what I do now at the Seattle Times, but on their web production team, which was something I had almost no experience with. Honestly, not sure why they put me on that team, but it was great because it really showed me the importance of the audience engagement side of journalism. I'd always thought as a reporter and editor that was more of a secondary side thing, like, you know, the reporting and the editing is really what makes the journalism happen, which is true, it does, but no one's going to read your journalism if you don't effectively distribute it to people and if you don't have a strategy for connecting with your readers. So that was a really influential semester and internship experience that then thought or helped me to think, you know, this is also something that I want to be able to work into reporting and really listening to audiences, figuring out the best ways to serve them. So then I went back for my senior year at Mizzou and was able to take some more classes in that area, was a TA at the community paper, which was really fun. And then from there did this fellowship at Poynter, which is how I got a little more interested in the reporting on student journalism side of things, which was really cool because I had just come out of college, but was able to see, like, I was very familiar with the challenges that student journalists were facing, but I learned so much during that summer by talking with a lot of student journalists about the great innovative things that student journalists are doing and the value that could come from, you know, sharing those experiences with other students. Because as you guys know, and I'm sure from conversations last night, so many of the issues on campuses are the same around the country. And I think there's so much that student journalists can learn from each other and how they cover those same issues, or, you know, even collaborating on stories that affect multiple campuses. So from there, I started this newsletter last fall, kind of out of what I had learned at Poynter, and with the goal of just providing those resources to students. It's been really amazing and rewarding to see the response to it. It was just a thing I started kind of while I was applying for jobs and had time when I was at home for a bit. And it's crazy how it's taken off and reaches almost 1,000 students now across the country, hopefully more soon. You should all subscribe to it. I'll give you the link at the end. But yeah, and then now I'm at the Seattle Times working on their digital audience engagement team, working with our reporters to figure out how to get our stories out to the public in the most effective ways, and hopefully doing some more reporting in the future as well. So all of that is to say that you can definitely change the trajectory of what you think you want to do throughout college, and it will work out, and all of your experience will lead you to other experiences, and it will fit together even if it doesn't seem like it at the time, because that's how I feel kind of looking back at it. I kind of talked about that already. That's the newsletter. Yeah, basically, I realized also that if I had a lot of doubts and a lot of uncertainty before I decided to launch this thing, thinking, will anyone besides my friends from journalism school read this? Will this actually be valuable? But I realized, I had done a lot of research and realized that there wasn't really a product or like something meeting this goal. And if you think that there is a need for something, there probably is, and people will respond to that more than you might think. So today we're going to talk about the state of student journalism. Is a very broad topic that I sat and thought about for a while. What is the state of student journalism? How do I condense that into an hour talk? So we're going to talk about some of the challenges and the issues that student journalists are having to deal with, as well as some solutions and some ways that I've seen publications and papers across the country address those challenges. A caveat: those are not like, oh, your publication is struggling to shift from print to online. Here's an easy 5-step solution, because all of these are kind of complex things, but hopefully it will give you, an idea of some of the ways that other outlets are dealing with those things. And then we'll also go through some really cool examples from college papers around the country that hopefully could be things that you guys could take back as ideas, and some of the highlights of publications that I've gotten to talk to for the newsletter and Pointer and other things. So, sorry, I'm gonna drink a little tea. So to get started, one big challenge that not only student journalists, but professional journalists all around the country have really faced in the last decade or so is losing a lot of advertising money and having their budgets shrink as a result of that. A show of hands, how many of you have seen that, or have your budget is a struggle at the student paper and you're trying to stay afloat? Yeah, I think that's a common thing. I know it was when I was at Mizzou. We ended up having to move offices between my freshman and sophomore years to move into a cheaper office in the student center that was about half the size because it made our costs less. And I think the budget issue is something that especially affects papers that are independently funded rather than funded by the school, which that can have other issues that we'll get into also. But it's been hard for every paper that has relied on selling print ads for so long as their business model to then figure out how to sustain themselves online, everything like that. So one possible solutions or different aspects of the solutions. A lot of papers have really cut back on their print days. There's a lot of papers that still probably have daily in the name, but now print either twice a week or 3 times a week or weekly. We were weekly when I was there, and that had been cut from twice a week a few years earlier. So that's something that really is helpful in, cutting those print and overhead costs, but also I think can be really valuable in just encouraging that that digital first mindset that really every publication needs to have, because it's 2019 and most people, especially in our age group, are consuming news online. So I think being less wedded to that print schedule and that print distribution can really actually be a benefit, even if it can be hard to change the way that something's always been done. My friends and I that are in our 20s at the Seattle Times joke almost that we sometimes wish that we didn't all have a print paper because it produces those daily deadlines and the need to fill space when sometimes a story might not be ready, or we have some older editors who are wonderful but can be a little more focused on the print side of things than the online, which as my team is focused on the online side of things, we have to remind them sometimes, we know you want to run this on Sunday print, but when is the best time to publish this story online? And another potential solution too is just thinking of other fundraising methods and other ways to raise money outside of those traditional ad sales. We'll go into an example of that I really like later in this presentation as one of the models, but there have been papers that have had success doing either like photo studios using their photojournalists' talent to shoot events or things like that, or having students run like social media campaigns or do other things that are capitalizing on those student journalist talents, but using those as services that they can benefit the university community. Another one, too, that unfortunately seems like it's been more and more common, but I think has been going on for a while, is student journalists being censored by their schools in a lot of cases. There have been a few cases of that this year, and I think that's where you can see the flip side of when your school funds your paper is that it can be, it can be good to have that consistent source of funding, but then if you write a story that the administration doesn't like, suddenly that funding can go away, and that's really dangerous. And I think in general, we've all seen in the past few years with the president's anti-press rhetoric and more polarization surrounding just the idea of journalism, that I think that really does trickle down to student journalists as well, in terms of people not trusting their news sources sometimes, or not wanting to talk to reporters because they think they're fake news or whatever the case may be. But I think the best thing that can be done for that, which I know is something that Frank will talk about in his afternoon session because he's the expert on this, is advocating for student press rights and just pushing legislators to develop bills that can protect student press freedom. Right now, there are 14 states that are protected by New Voices or student press freedom laws, and those have been introduced in 11 more states this year, which is great. And there's also really great organizations like the Student Press Law Center and others focusing on student free speech that can be resources if you or your publication is facing censorship or having those issues with your administration, or they're not giving you the public records that they're supposed to be giving you, which I knew we ran into as an issue a lot because I think people don't always take student journalists seriously and think that they can, keep pushing them back and that the journalists aren't going to know enough necessarily about like the laws or their rights. So those organizations can be really helpful resources. Another thing that really is not just a student journalism challenge, but has faced all of journalism, especially legacy print newspapers, is just you're competing with so many other news sources where, you think about 30 years ago when the student newspaper was truly just a print-based newspaper, and you were able to have those exclusive stories that run in your daily paper. People are picking it up on campus, and you can really have that audience to yourself in a lot of ways. But now with social media, you're probably competing with the local paper in some cases, even with, like when we had all those things happen at Mizzou, we're competing with all of these other national or online or print publications. And everyone is tweeting and getting that news out as fast as possible. So I think that has been really a challenge, but I think another solution to that is really focusing on that digital presence, focusing on online journalism over maybe the print product, which the print product can still have value in a lot of ways in how big stories are presented or in doing, packages and things like that. But I think in a lot of ways, college journalists and student journalists in general can really be leaders in the industry in how they adapt to those online challenges because I mean we've all grown up with social media, with reading things online, where we know that that's how people our age consume news. And I think, especially because at a student publication, you have that new rotation of students every 3 or 4 years, which can be a challenge in a lot of ways. Like when you're beat reporting and your beat reporter has maybe a semester or two to develop those sources, but then might leave for something else. That's not great versus a professional outlet doesn't have that. But in a lot of ways, it's good because you, as students, are always on top of the new developments in journalism and in how young people are consuming news. So I think that's something that honestly a lot of professional papers could learn from and benefit from student leadership. And then finally, this is something that can be a challenge, but also in some ways an opportunity for student journalists. As more and more local newspapers are shrinking, or some unfortunately closing entirely, there have been 1,800 in the last 15 years that have either closed or merged with other papers, which is terrible and leaves so many communities without a local news source or a local newspaper. In some cases, especially in maybe smaller college towns, those daily college papers, whether it's print or online, can really be one of the strongest news sources for those communities. So that was something that I got to talk with a lot of student publications for Pointer last summer, and was really interesting to see how different publications are really trying to fill in those gaps in that local coverage, and how they're distributing their resources to cover their communities as well as their campuses, whether that looks like allocating their beats differently to have a focus on the community as well as just the university, whether that looks like having more outreach to your audience in the town or the city outside of students. There's a lot of opportunities, and one of the projects we'll talk about later will touch on that as well. But those are some of the things that I've really seen come up in reporting and have heard from some different students about, how should we be adapting to this, or what are the best things we can be doing. But now I want you guys to talk amongst yourselves, talk with the person next to you for like 2 minutes, and talk about what other strategies you've seen, or in your time in college journalism, how have you or your publication adapted to those challenges, or what else should those of us in the room know that that I maybe didn't touch on in the presentation, and then we'll share out in a few minutes. So ready, go. Oh, sure. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
No problem.
Poor thing.
It's okay, as long as my voice can hold up for just a few minutes. Yes, half an hour, yeah. All right, I want to hear some of the examples that you guys talked about. So, yeah. Okay, so who wants to share something that they or their group talked about? Because I want everyone to be able to learn from the things that their publications are doing and the ways that they're developing strategies to adapt to changes. So, yeah.
Something that I didn't talk about in our group, but is kind of, now that I was thinking about it, was like with the shift to like cutting days to print and then going online. Something that we do is that like on days that we don't print, we call them like off print days. We come into the office at the time that we would print and we edit stories and put them up online for the next day. So there's constantly stuff online. So we'll come in from like 6 to 11 and then go home and then put everything online.
Yeah, so making sure that you're still having that daily content even when it's not a print day. Yeah, for sure. Other volunteers, examples? Yeah.
We really try to use a lot of multimedia stuff, so videos that explain things, or like galleries people like clicking on. So yeah, just stuff that people actually want to look at and don't necessarily have to read, or that complement a story.
Yeah, absolutely. It's easier sometimes to have a great photo story of something than to get people to read a long form story
We do
about it.
roundups too, like headlines you might have missed in video form and as just an article, so that you can like click on stuff too, and that gets a lot of engagement.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah.
All right, so at the Collegian, we decided to do a newspaper weekly, and then on the days that we're not printing, we invested more into the digital and online medium. We also started up more multimedia in terms of podcasts, a little bit of video, and a lot more photo galleries, photo essays, and all that good stuff. And then for the weekly paper, we decided to put in more news stories from around the week, rather than just daily, just like so. Kind of like a summary of what happened on campus through Monday through Friday.
Yeah, that's great. That's kind of what we ended up doing too, is making the weekly paper more stories that would be relevant to people for more than just that day, maybe more features or more analysis that would be timely all week. Yeah.
I didn't discuss this with the group, but I just thought of it. So at our Rutgers newspaper, the Daily Target, we also use a lot of social media. So something that we just started was, everyone knows Humans of New York, right? So we have a Humans of RU, which is where we take pictures of students and ask about their stories. And a lot of people like that because it features students, and also it's a big social media presence. And we've also done something called RU Street Style, so also highlighting the different fashion and outfits that people wear. So it's very image-based and social media-based.
Yeah, that's awesome, because obviously people love to see their friends or people they know and get those little stories that don't have to be a huge profile or something like that. Yeah. Yeah.
I really didn't talk about this, but one challenge we're facing at Carbondale is kind of going back to this print ad sales thing. We have a really old community, and we used to run 6 out of 7 days a week. We cut it down to 5, and now we're down to 1. So it's trying to convince, or finding ways to convince the older generation in our town that, well, we're not dying because we're not printing as much. So I don't know if you have any suggestions on finding a way to change that traditional sense of what a newspaper does for that older generation.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that honestly I see a lot in my current job, is that we have a lot of older subscribers that we're really trying to get to engage with our website and our digital products, and show them the value that can come from that. So that we should talk more later. Yeah, go ahead.
So you mentioned the online versus like newspaper format, and it's a clear difference too as to who your audience is as soon as you have that, and who's consuming your news, and whether it's community based or whether it's just like the wider world being able to access that, and how they access that, and how they convert that, and how that sometimes can be problematic to college campuses, where
Yeah.
there's aggregators like Breitbart that like to kind of demonize campuses.
Yes.
A lot of times.
We had some of those issues also, especially when we were covering race and protests and things like that. So, yeah, and it's also an interesting issue too that comes up when your college-centric story could be read by people anywhere in terms of like how much context you include in those stories. You can't assume that people know the main figures on your campus, or because something could get picked up by an aggregator, and how do you respond to that as a student publication? So, any others? Yeah.
Kind of going back to what you said about filling in the gaps, a program within our J school is we outreach and engage with the local high school and try to get more low-income students of color to be able to actually, who don't have access to like a newspaper in their high school, to be able to learn like podcasting and like storytelling and stuff like that.
That's awesome. Yeah. What school, sorry, did you go to?
UMass Amherst.
Oh, cool. Okay. That's awesome. Yeah. One more maybe? Yeah.
So we started focusing a lot on kind of like live news. We went online daily about, I guess, like last year. And I think it's probably fair to say we had a low reader engagement, especially with the print weekly, and it's kind of hard to cut down when you only print one day a week. So we're still printing one day a week, but we recently started doing a lot of live coverage. So last semester we actually beat like local news outlets on a student organized protest against Senator Jeff Flake, who voted for Kavanaugh into, Supreme Court. So we beat like, the Boston Globe on that with our live coverage, and just like posting on live updates online and social media. And then of course like having print news stories and features like the next day, hopefully, in the newspaper. But we've received a lot of engagement that way on like live Twitter updates. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. With things like events or protests or like sports, obviously can be a huge traffic driver, also something that people are invested in. So now we're going to go through just a few examples of things that have really stood out to me as innovative in different aspects of college journalism, and hopefully could spark ideas for things to bring back to your campuses. And for those of you who might have talked amongst your group but not been able to share, I would love to talk with you after, and that goes for any question or anything too, but I'll leave some time at the end for questions too, and would love to talk with you more about that. So this is one that is pretty recent but was really one of my favorites that combines that the figuring out what to do with print to make it special, but also a really cool fundraising idea. UNC and Duke is a really, really huge college basketball rivalry. RIP to UNC, who killed my bracket yesterday. But it's a little bitter, but it's okay. But they did this really cool project this spring leading up to one of their big rivalry games where they did a print issue together, and each college newspaper did half of the issue. They talked ahead of time and really shared all of their. They started talking about it, I think, in January, and then I think it came out in early March, late February or so. Decided on one page size, because I think their papers printed on different pages, really decided how they were going to put it together. And then each paper did the reporting, sold ads, did the design and everything for half of the paper. So it turned into this really cool rivalry thing that I think got a ton of engagement. And they also used it as a fundraiser, asking people to, support the Daily Tar Heel or support the Duke Chronicle, and trying to get each school to beat the other school in terms of donations, which ended up being really successful for them. Each paper raised more than $25,000. And I think UNC won, not 100% sure. But I mean, that's a lot of money for a college publication. And to do that in just a month or two of fundraising was really cool. So I think something that could be learned from that is that you shouldn't be afraid to collaborate with other student publications, even if they're maybe rivals or you've never done that before, because that could really lead to a lot of valuable shared knowledge, really cool innovations like this, and also capitalizing on people's emotional connections, like to sports in a lot of cases, or to that rivalry in general, could really help bring in money or donors. I believe the Daily Tar Heel said that 90% of the people who donated had never donated before to the paper. So while they might have their alums who support the paper and want to donate and give back to that, this could really be a way to reach those new audiences and maybe bring in some money. So that was one that I thought was really fun and had never seen anything like that before. Another example that, that goes into that audience-driven side of journalism and really shows how publications can be engaging with not just their campuses, but their whole community, is this project that the Shorthorn at the University of Texas at Arlington has started this semester, which is a project where they basically set up a Google form and wrote a story explaining what the goal of the project was, but they're asking their audiences, what do you want to know about either the campus or about Arlington as a whole? They're one situation where I think Arlington itself doesn't have a daily print paper, so they're reaching a lot of those community audiences as well as their campus. I talked with one of the editor who runs this last month, and she was just saying that those stories have gotten great engagement with their readers because they're a lot of times things that you might not think is necessarily a story, but people want to know about, and they've really done a good job of walking their readers through how they found the information. We wanted to know why there are so few restaurants in this one part of town, so this is where we started, this is who we talked to, and maybe making it a bit more conversational and informal compared to what you might think of as a traditional news story can be really valuable and really a great way to show your readers that you want to start those conversations with them and really be engaging with them. Another one, is anyone here from Georgetown? No? Okay, because I knew there were lots of East Coast representation. This was a project that I was really amazed by the scope of it for a student publication. And the Georgetown student newspaper did this project starting last school year, but then a lot of it was last summer, where there had been a lot of coverage of Georgetown, the university, reconciling with the fact that it had owned slaves in its history and had then sold those slaves basically to keep the university financially afloat, which was a big thing that got national coverage and a lot of people were interested in. But then the student paper was able to, they got a grant from the Fund for Investigative Journalism. I think they were the first student group to get a grant from them. And they were able to go to this tiny town in Louisiana where a lot of those, where the slaves had originally been sold. Most of their descendants were still concentrated in that area. Two of the student reporters who went on the trip were actually descendants of those slaves that the university had owned. So that's one of the examples of the stories that they did when they were there. Just really looking at the university's impact on that community in a very historical way, and a lot of those people who had descended from people at the university, Georgetown had given them benefits basically in admissions and things like that, but the town didn't have a high school. So even if the university gives those benefits and tries to make those reparations, how can you get into Georgetown if you don't have a high school in your town? So the students really did a good job looking at those personal stories, but also some of the structural, bigger issues that still are affecting all of the descendants. Another one that wasn't college specific, but was really a cool innovation by a lot of student journalists. How many did you guys see this last month when it came out? Yeah, since Parkland. So this was a really amazing project that was mainly organized by the Trace, which nonprofit reporting on gun violence, and then also with the Miami Herald and McClatchy. But they worked with more than 200 student journalists from around the country to tell stories of every child in America killed by gun violence in the year since Parkland, since the shooting had happened. And that was something that was just really amazing in the scope of its, collaboration. How do you organize 200 students to be able to report on the same topic and standardize the reporting and, present it in this really engaging online format? But that was one that I think also shows the value of, imagine if a network of college papers all across the country decided we're going to cover whether it's, gun violence or a different campus issue, and the power that could come out of that, even though it obviously takes a lot of organization and a lot of work going into it on the front end. And I think something that really came out of that, one of the editors, who was an adult, not a student, said adults have to fix this problem, but teens can tell these stories. And that really stuck with me because I think there's, even though as student journalists, we don't have as much professional experience, obviously, there's also a lot of perspective that you can bring as a young person, especially reporting on issues like this, where they're reporting on, people their own age or younger. There's, you really know what would resonate with that audience, and that can be really valuable as well. And then finally, this was a really powerful package that the State Hornet at Sacramento State University did on covering sexual assault on their campus, which is something that obviously can be a big and controversial issue on any campus, but can obviously also be hard to report on a lot of the times in terms of lack of records, or it's something that administrators do not usually want to talk with you about. But basically, their paper found out that there had been a reported rape on campus. They found that out by reading the campus police logs of all the incidents that happened, but the campus had never notified students about it. So they did this story letting all the students know, hey, this reported thing happened, that the campus didn't send out an alert, or I don't know, it's probably different campus to campus. We would get Clery release emails when something happened on campus. But so they reported that, just uncovering it on campus, and then wrote an editorial also about, this should have been reported. Students should have been notified about this. Then that led to a campus protest, and then that led to administrative response about trying to explain their side of things and their perspective. So then their whole staff decided to really take on the issue across different aspects of campus, looking at how sexual assault related policies affect, athletes, or talking with people who are advocating for, more rights for sexual assault survivors on campus, things like that. And they really put this impressive package together in 2 weeks of reporting, which is pretty quick to coordinate, their whole staff and have all those stories. So that was something that really, stood out to me as a great example of really mobilizing around one issue and holding their university accountable and really spurring change and bringing that information to light. So those are the examples I wanted to touch on, but we have some more time for questions and for whatever else you guys want to talk about. But really, just to wrap up, I think it's so great that you guys are here, and hopefully you'll learn a lot this weekend from all of the different speakers. But really, student journalism is, I think, more and more important, especially as the local news landscape is uncertain in a lot of ways. And I think student journalists really play that vital role in covering their communities as well as their schools. So even when you get pushback from your administrations, or you might feel uncertain about what you're doing, know that it's really valuable, and thanks for all the work that you do. But with that, do you guys have any questions or anything else that came up that you want to talk about? And also, there's my contact info, so feel free to reach out afterwards about anything that you want to talk about. Yeah.
So I'm the business manager at my triangle at my newspaper, and I also write in sports, so I have a side in both, and what we struggle in is motivating both the writers and the salespeople, because our school is heavily known for engineering and science and STEM fields, and it's hard to motivate people at the paper because we're on the quarter system. Everything's fast paced. It's so hard to get people to put in the work to do all the stuff, but then they also love to write. So it's finding that middle balance for both the salespeople and the writers. And I don't know if you have any experience with how to incorporate that into the paper and how we can actually move forward and get a stronger presence.
Yeah, with motivation especially. I think, that was something that the year that I switched from reporting to editing at the student paper, we had to cut our budget a ton, and we went from being able to pay beat writers and reporters to not being able to pay them. So that was something that we were trying to figure out as well, was how do we motivate people and get them to be committed when there's no financial incentive. Not that there had been a huge financial incentive before, but still, getting paid a little bit is better than not getting paid. I think we found that the most effective thing in motivating people was not burning people out, and especially if you're in an editing position, really being realistic with the work that you're giving people, and especially when you have people that are passionate and want to contribute. You want to keep them feeling valued and feeling engaged, and you don't want to overwhelm them, so then they might say, no, I can't commit to this, I can't do this, and then drop it entirely. So I think really just being conscious of, people's workloads, of checking in with them outside of just their work for the paper, and, letting them know that if they, their work as a reporter, as a ad salesperson is really valuable, but if you understand if this week they have to cut back on their commitment. And I think strategies like that, and just being really open, or allowing them to be open with you, can be really helpful, rather than just continuing to give more and more work, because there's always more work to be done, but then that can often lead to people leaving entirely. Yeah. Sorry.
Go ahead.
You go ahead, and then you.
You talked a lot about the protests at Mizzou,
Yeah.
and some of the advantages of being a student journalist and having those campus sources that you could use. I was wondering if you could talk about potentially the challenges associated with being a student journalism in that type of story, especially since maybe some of the people involved or people or are acquainted with, and maybe the challenge of being a student and a journalist in that situation. As I recall, during a particularly tense moment during those protests, there was a student journalist who was trying to film it, and he was told in no uncertain terms that he was not welcome, and was kind of threatened with physical removal. I mean, it was a heated moment, but that was caught on film, and that made national news. And I was wondering if you could talk about, if you had experiences with that, and what happens when, in those really important moments, if the people involved don't want to talk to you as a student journalist?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that was something that we saw come up, because while we did have a lot of sources from doing this coverage throughout the semester, we had a really good relationship with the student body president, who is a important figure in that, and would talk to us openly. There were also students who did not want to talk to us because they hadn't liked the way we'd covered certain things in the past. So that went both ways for sure. There were also students that, while they might not want to talk to us just because they maybe they weren't happy with the way their friend had been quoted in an article, then turned around and talked to Matt Pierce at the LA Times, and we're like, oh, come on, we've been trying to talk to you for months, and then you'd sit down with him for an hour. So there were definitely those sorts of frustrations where we felt like we got passed over in some ways for the larger outlets, which, I mean, I can understand also. But we knew that we would be the ones who had the opportunity to keep covering the ripple effects over the next, year or more than that after the national media left after that, week. I think in terms of knowing people who were involved, that was definitely something that was tricky for a lot of our writers involved. It also, those issues maybe also brought to light the fact that our staff was not nearly as diverse as it should have been, which is a whole separate thing that they have still been trying to remedy, and I think also is a challenge for a lot of staffs. But in terms of the people who did know students that were involved, I think we just tried to be careful in terms of the story assignments that we gave them, and maybe, if your friend was on this side of the protests and tipped you off to something, like, you wouldn't be the person to write that, but you could pass that on to someone else on the staff, and we would assign that to someone who didn't know them personally, if that kind of answers the question. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
And I was wondering, through speaking kind of with the different student journalists from around the country, what suggestions do you have for those students that may not come from a top tier program or a tier 2, whatever the New York Times
Yes.
director said, and like getting into these positions and going ahead when you may be from a smaller program or not even have a journalism program at your school?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I'm not even going to talk about the New York Times thing, but I think in a lot of ways, smaller programs, while it can be tough to not have maybe the name recognition or the resources, you can also do more if you have a smaller staff. Like, you as one person can have the opportunity to do more. I found that honestly in internships that I've had and things that I've done, where if you're one intern on a staff of 200 people, you're going to get like probably the little intern stories a lot of the time. If you're an intern on a team of like 5 people, they're very quickly going to see you as someone who can really be a full-time person with those responsibilities. And so I think you could apply that in some ways to being on a school with a smaller journalism program, is that while you might not have the resources or be a nationally recognized student paper, like, you can still absolutely be really valuable to your communities, and it's probably in some ways also easier to change some of those institutional things versus in a more, I think the larger a paper is, a lot of the times it can be a little more bureaucratic in terms of, this is the way we've always done something. So I think being smaller can allow you to like pivot and adapt more easily. Yeah.
One of the things about the journalism industry is that it's great at being able to cover a variety of issues, but it's poor at being able to create pipelines in certain communities, and that's largely due to it being a very elitist industry. In kind of going on what he said about the entire New York Times thing, how are newspaper organizations and journalism titans kind of being able to widen that pipeline?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I don't think there's an easy answer to that. That's something that we just hired a new person for my team at the Times, and it's really figuring out how to reach out to communities, or I think a lot of it comes down to the people in charge of doing the hiring, which I'm not, I'm 22 years old, but being able to recognize like the varied experiences on people's resumes and how they can contribute. When if you have an elite school degree and you may have done some more internships and things like that, that's great and really valuable, but there's so much value that can come from even non-journalism experiences, which one of my friends who was actually last summer's Nieman student fellow wrote a lot about, I think, last summer, in terms of the value of going to journalism school versus being able to apply some of those non-journalism experiences to other things. So I think, I don't really have a great answer to that. I think it comes down to, the hiring, but also programs like ProPublica that have done a really great job supporting student journalists from underrepresented backgrounds. And I think you have to build that pipeline at the student level, and even making sure, on your campus staffs that you're reaching out to groups that might not traditionally have been included, because that's how people will start to be in that community and get that experience that can help build them up in their careers. Does that answer it a little bit, at least? Okay. Yeah.
Mine's not necessarily like a question, it's more of a comment that was like prompted by the Georgetown story, about like the importance of like when talking about people who are or were sold into slavery, about like restoring respect to their identities. So like referring to them not as slaves but as like enslaved African, because language is important, and that's like something I've had to learn, especially like schooling in South Carolina, where that's like a constant topic. So like when referring for anyone, to people in slavery, referring to them as enslaved Africans, because slavery wasn't their identity. They were people before them.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I appreciate that.
We for the Spectator, and we cut our print from like every day to daily, and from daily to once a week.
Yeah.
And because of that, we've been trying to get more innovative in how we sort of roll out stories and how people interact with our content online. The question I've had is like, what innovative ways have you seen student papers sort of market their bigger stories that can't go in the weekly print or in their print versions, but that they want people to read?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I think, like, how do you make sure those stories online are reaching?
Especially because they're not like on the front page now.
Right.
Now they're just sort of stories that go online.
Right. I think a lot of that can come down to just using the avenues that you do have online to promote stories, whether it's, social media is obviously a big one for student publications, and I think really having a plan for how you're going to do that in advance, and making sure those bigger stories get treated differently maybe than your average news story, in terms of, with your average story, maybe you tweet it and you put it on Facebook. But with this one, like, we could do, a tweet thread explaining like our process behind it. We could really make sure we're showcasing the multimedia that might have gone into it with photos or videos. We could do like an Instagram story, if you guys have a publication Instagram. That's something that we've really been trying to experiment more with at the Times. One of my coworkers has led that. But I think giving people as many avenues to reach the story as possible, because it's really easy when you're on, your social media feed to scroll past something when you see it once, or to ignore it, especially like on Twitter. But if you are really trying to engage with people and posting it in as many different ways as possible, I think that can be helpful in making sure it gets out in front of people. Yeah.
You talked a bit about engaging the community outside of just your campus, especially with local news. How would you recommend actually reaching out to people in the community and going about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. What school are you at?
Boston College.
Okay, cool. I think really explaining to people, I think maybe part of it comes from starting to cover your local community even before you might have all of those relationships, because then you can approach, whether it's, business owners or city council people or whoever the case may be, you can say, this is what we've done already. We're really trying to cover not only our university, but the Boston community, the neighborhood. And we want to, talk with you about the issues going on and things like that. I think just starting the conversation can be valuable. Somewhere like Boston, especially, I'm always amazed how many colleges there are here also. But there's obviously a lot of media, and there might be a lot of demands on these people's time. But I think opening up that conversation, maybe even before you have a story that you're trying to, reach someone for comment on, just saying that, I'm the editor of this publication. I would love to have coffee with you and just talk about the issues, like, completely off the record. I think that could be a really, like, a good starting step to just building those connections. Yeah.
So, like, audience engagement has been like a growing kind of position at publications for the past few years. What do you know now that you wish you knew when you were in college regarding kind of this shift in these positions popping up that, aren't being taught in traditional journalism schools?
Yeah, that is a huge thing, honestly. Yeah, like the only reason that I took classes that were engagement oriented at Mizzou was because I sought them out as electives. And it's not really something like in our reporting class that everyone had to take, you had to tweet a certain amount, you had to be active on Twitter, but like they didn't really teach you the strategy or the broader mindset behind that. So I think, first of all, I wish I had known before getting later into college, like the value of it, I think, because like I'd mentioned, I kind of saw it as secondary to the reporting and editing, but really you have to be able to engage with people and reach people with your stories, or no one's going to read them. Even if you have a great story, if you don't distribute it well, it's not going to get out into the world. So I think I wish I had known the importance of it. And honestly, yeah, there's a lot of jobs in engagement related things. And I think that's something that those skills can be really valuable, even if you're wanting to go into a reporting job. If you tell your potential employee when you're applying for things, say, I can report, I can go to this protest, I can report, but I also, am comfortable live tweeting things. I can also, shoot some video at the scene. Like anything that you can do to make you more well-rounded will help you. And I think engagement is one facet of that for sure. Yeah.
So I'm wondering a little bit, because under the solutions for like budgetary things,
Mhm.
you mentioned cutting print, but we're a weekly publication. We have been since our founding,
Yeah.
and when it comes to where we have problems, it's online a lot. So when it comes to budgetary restraints, it's more on the online side of things.
Sure.
And how do you balance having a website that is like both easy to interact with, but can be maintained cheaply without having to pay students to keep it up, because we don't have funding for that and stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, one of my best friends when I was an editor was our web developer person, and our website had been built in like the early 2000s and was just the bane of her existence. So I think whatever you can do to have a website that will be, simple and low maintenance while still allowing you to do those, the customizable things that you want to do for bigger projects and things like that. I think, I don't know, honestly, like WordPress, as simple and blog-like as it may be sometimes, can also have a lot of great customizable things for student journalists, and it's something that's built on the central WordPress framework that is not going to like shut down automatically, or if you code something wrong, like it's probably not going to break your whole website, hopefully. You think, yeah, that's what they tell you. So I think just looking at like simple CMSs like that, especially if you have limited resources and you aren't going to be able to hire someone to like customize and code your website, because that can also honestly lead to issues where then that person leaves and then they have to either transfer their knowledge and the new person can't get into the old things that the old person had done. So I think simplicity can be good in a lot of ways and can let you really focus on the journalism itself rather than the tech problems that can come with that.
I have time for one.
One more? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, just as a follow-up to that.
Yeah.
I'm from the Tufts Daily. We print daily, except on Fridays we cut print editions, like we're online only to save money.
Mhm.
But I'm so attached to print. And I think a lot of people in our community are too.
Yeah.
We've run like amazing photo spreads. I think a lot of importance lies in the layout. So I just want to ask you, like, is going online only inevitable? And like, how can I keep the Tufts Daily in print for as long as possible?
Yeah. Oh man, that's a good question. And I think there is, whether as journalists or for the community who's used to that, like there's a lot of value and like a lot of nostalgia that can come with the cutting of print. I think kind of, continuing off of the last question, figuring out maybe, while you still have the print product, but figuring out the more that you can do like to vary online presentation, the more special things you can do with like multimedia or project pages or things like that. So then when, I wouldn't say cutting print is inevitable, but I think that's what, even professional, like local papers have seen, some of them have started cutting their print days too. So I think it is a trend that a lot of places are seeing to save money. So I think maybe knowing that might come down the road. So thinking about like how can you be presenting things online really more creatively, or working to develop some of those structures could help, where then, you know, maybe in a few years they decide to cut one more day off, and then you already have those resources and those tools in place to still sustain that, like the layout and the, you know, visual presentation. If that makes sense. Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much. Please let me know if I'll be here the rest of the day. So if you have any more questions, thanks for sticking through my rough voice also. But yeah, thank you so much.